Hi, Dr. Jayne Gardner here. I'm presenting the next segment of my podcast, Best Job Ever. And I want to say thank you to my two sponsors, John Mack, Joel Patterson, at the software company in Plano called The Vested. And today, I want to introduce a former coaching client, Ed Cox, who is the founder of the Cox Law Firm in Bedford. Hi, Ed. Glad you're here.
Hey, good to see you.
Yes. The reason I think we're talking is because, first of all, we coached together 12 years ago.
Yes.
And, we kept up for Christmas cards and that sort of thing. But then all of a sudden, about a month ago, you've sent me this copy of, or a video, I guess an audio of a speech you made for your EO group, your entrepreneurs organization.
Yes.
And it said a little bit about what your coaching had meant to you.
Right.
And I was just elated, that I guess you don't hear from someone, and so you wonder, what's really going on in their lives. Did it even impact them? So to see that you were still believing in it and doing it, I was just thrilled to death.
Yeah.
And I immediately wanted you to come on this podcast and talk to our audience about how coaching has impacted your business as well as your life.
Right. Right.
I remember the way you started your speech. If you probably remember, of course you do, that you started with just naming some of your empowering beliefs.
Right. Right.
So could you tell us some of those?
Yeah, I started that talk to an audience of strangers.
Oh, I didn't realize. I thought it was your EO group that you were talking to.
It was my EO group, but there were people from all over the country.
Interesting.
In San Antonio for this event. And so there were some people from my Fort Worth chapter, but there were a lot more people from many different places.
I see.
And so I started by saying, I am compassionate and caring. I am brilliant and perceptive. I am charismatic and engaging. These are 3 of the 23 affirmations that I say daily, and this is the story of how I came to write them.
Oh, I love that. Well, tell us that story.
Yeah.
And I may interrupt you some and kind of
Sure.
ask you questions.
Great.
Go ahead and tell us your story.
So in 2009, I woke up one morning and I had this numbness in half of my head. It was like somebody had something that just went straight down the middle of my head, and the entire left side of my head and my left arm were completely numb.
Scary.
And so I thought that I had maybe slept on my arm wrong, but I didn't really know what had happened to my head. So I had a lot to do that day, and so I got up and made some coffee, and I went upstairs to get working, and I worked for a couple of hours, and I was planning on getting ready and going to the office, but I made one mistake. I told my wife, Robin, about the numbness, and so she smartly told me to go to the hospital, and so I did.
So let me understand this. You didn't have time for a stroke.
Right. I did not.
I know just how you feel. It's like, no, that couldn't be. So tell us what happened after that.
Yeah, well, and I had no idea that I had a stroke. So
Even before you got there, you really didn't know what it was.
Yeah, I had been healthy and just really no idea what was causing this numbness. So they ran some tests, and the doctor came in and told me that I had had a hemorrhagic stroke. And I had no idea what that was. And so he explained to me that I had had some bleeding in my brain, and that was causing the numbness that I was feeling. And so my wife and our then 8-year-old son, Will, came to the hospital, and I remember really being comforted having him there. And, my wife was obviously concerned. And the doctor came in and explained what had happened to them. and then said he needed to admit me into intensive care for observation because they didn't know if I was continuing to bleed.
Oh, that's terrifying.
And so
Intensive care itself just makes me scared.
yeah, so I, oddly enough, I was very much at peace, and I think it was having Will and Amanda, or Will and my wife Robin there. And so I remember in intensive care that I was wide awake. Except for the numbness, I felt completely normal. And so I think the nurses really enjoyed having me there because I was one of the few people in intensive care that wasn't knocked out or asleep.
Or complaining.
Yeah. So I was released from the hospital a couple of days later, and I went into work the next day. And I remember being really happy about the numbness because nobody could see what I was feeling, and I didn't have to tell anybody about what had happened.
Sure.
And so 2 more of my affirmations are, I love my wife and children who nurture, encourage, and fulfill me. And I love, serve, and provide for my family. And so fast forward to 2011, and I start having problems with my vision at night, and that turns into double vision. I go and see a specialist, and he tells me I've had another stroke.
And that was 2 years later, or
2 years later.
2 years later?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, but was it the same feeling?
It was different because it only affected my vision.
Yeah,
And so I had to
okay.
wear a patch over my left eye to drive at night
Okay.
and be able to see where I was going. And so he told me that the blood was impinging on one of my optic nerves. And he said there really wasn't anything that they could do, that the swelling should go down as the blood was absorbed. And luckily, in a short while, I got my vision back and everything went back to normal.
Your fear level at that point, were you still calm? And
I don't really, I think that it was something that with it not being able to be treated or without being able to have surgery, it was something that I felt like I needed to accept, and the doctors told me to move on. It wasn't a condition that should keep me from doing anything.
that's encouraging. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you did.
Yeah, so I did, and I think that life went on about normal until 2013. And before I tell you what happened in 2013, 2 more of the affirmations that I wrote coaching with you are I am worthy of great success in all my endeavors.
I remember that.
And I am constantly growing and evolving.
Yeah.
So I'm at work one day in 2013, and I start having trouble walking. And by that time, I was seeing a neurologist at UT Southwestern. So I got in the car and I drove over there, and they ran some tests. And I remember for the first time they did an angiogram.
Okay.
And what that involves is putting this long, thin catheter in my femoral artery and running that catheter up my veins through my heart and into the right side of my neck.
So they can see about the blood flow, I guess.
Right. And so I remember being awake the whole time they did that, thinking to myself, why am I awake? Feeling this. I mean, it was
That's a good point.
really,
Just put me under, please.
really surreal. And so they injected iodine to get contrast in my veins. And I remember tasting salt on my tongue when they did that. And so my neurologist told me that they discovered I had a cluster of veins in my brainstem that was, they were rupturing, very small, but rupturing from time to time, and they were impinging on nerves in my brainstem, and that's what
see.
was causing the problem.
That's why it affected eyes, head, and then
Right,
walking. Okay.
Yeah, and so this particular stroke caused physical side effects that I hadn't had before. So I lost the use of my left leg, and I lost the use of my left arm. And so for the first time, I couldn't not tell people about it because they could see that something wasn't right.
You had to talk about it.
Yeah. And so I think by this time, you and I were coaching, and I decided that I really needed to do something to calm my mind, thinking, whatever I can do to help would be good. And I took up meditation, and, I could not sit still for a minute. And what I realized is that I had this persistent negative voice in my mind that we talked about, and I think we named it the doubting disliker.
I remember the doubting disliker. It's the name of your conditioned self, because
Yeah.
we all have one, but you really nailed yours with that description.
Yeah.
Because it was always doubting you. Is this really happening, and that sort of thing? Can you really handle this? That sort of thing.
Yeah, and I felt like it was constantly nailing me. Just
Keeping you from feeling positive, I guess.
Yeah. And so you encouraged me to spend some time thinking about my gifts and talents and positive attributes, and trying to write a list of affirmations that I could memorize
Right.
and repeat to get me in a better frame of mind.
Shifting
Yeah.
to that other state of mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting because, most people, all of us have one, but most of the time we don't realize, we think it's just our real voice until we realize how negative and self-sabotaging it can be. And then that's when you kind of want to peel that back and see, who am I really here? Because that's not who I am.
Yeah, and coaching with you helped me see that for the first time. And I think, if anybody is like I am, you hear that voice and you believe it. You don't. You don't consider yourself as somebody who has multiple personalities or whatever.
No.
You just think, well, this is true.
You don't even, you just think it's you.
Yeah.
Your
Yeah,
natural voice.
Right. And so,
What do you think about when I told you there was these two parts of you, though, that wasn't the real you? Did that mix you up, or kind of think, oh, this is really crazy?
well, it was really, it made me feel so good and was so freeing to be able to think about this as something that was separate from and we could work on.
Oh, that's great.
And I remember you teaching me so much about brain plasticity, and that was a very optimistic thing for me, especially
right.
with the strokes. And so, it was really a great process of sharing so many things I was thinking with you, and working towards having tools that I could use to get myself in a better place
Back
mentally.
to the real you.
Right, right. And so I ultimately wrote 23 affirmations.
I remember that.
And what I've found over time is that I've come to see these affirmations as true, and as I said them daily and began to believe that they were true, they affected how I behaved. And I
Yeah.
felt like my behavior came into alignment with my affirmations. And
The words and thoughts and deeds aligned.
yeah. And so, but the best thing that they gave me was really hope. And it was not hope that I wouldn't have another stroke. Obviously, I hoped I wouldn't. But as I said these, I felt like they built me up. They improved my character, and they helped me believe in myself. And ultimately, they really helped me be the best I can be and love my wife and children as much as I can, and contribute to others using my gifts and talents.
So they prioritized some things for you.
Yeah, definitely.
How did you, in my process, I know you find the authentic self and then you want to define your belief system in your authentic self. But how did you install them? I mean, that's a really hard part of the process I found for people to get, that you really have to work on putting these in. And a lot of people say, well, this sounds so stupid. I don't really believe them in the beginning. And then there comes your conditioned self saying, that's not really true. So how did you get them to gel inside yourself?
Well, number one, I absolutely believe that you knew what you were talking about.
I love it.
And were steering me in the right direction.
That's good.
And so I committed to memorizing them, and I just remember sitting on my meditation cushion and getting through them and trying to memorize them. And, it took me a while. And then once I did, saying them, and we all have good days and bad days, and some days I felt they were really true and I was doing great, and other days not so much.
That makes a lot of sense. It doesn't happen just overnight.
Right. And so it was being consistent and ultimately developing the habit of saying those. And that really made the change for me over time.
I love it.
Yeah.
Because you were so persistent and insistent on doing it.
Yes.
Yeah, that's good. That's good help for the audience, because in today's world, we want something really quick, to fix what problem is, a pill or something. And I think this process is really about you changing yourself. So it does take some time and effort on that.
Right. And, if you talk to my wife or kids, I think they would say that I've been the husband and father that I've always been. But I think everybody wants to be the best version of themselves they can be. And it's not that I don't do things today that I wish I didn't and think things. It's that our work gave me tools and ways to think about things that come up in my life in a way that's more productive, and has helped me in a lot of different ways.
So you can kind of still hear that conditioning coming up at times, but you can catch it and turn it into a more positive. You can kind of reframe it, shift it, we call it.
Yeah. And there are times that I am keenly aware of it, and I just
freeze in it.
In it and can't get past it. But the majority of the time,
You can flip it pretty fast.
Yeah.
That's so vulnerable. I appreciate you saying that, because I do think that things happen in our lives that throw us back in that. It's kind of like a trigger for wanting to be safe the way we've always been. And so if there's a crisis out in your life, I think we tend to go back to it. I do, at least. And sometimes I can catch it immediately and shift. And sometimes, a couple of hours later, before I even get it, that I'm in that thinking again.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And I agree with you. the safety of it is that I do have this process, and eventually I get it and I go, oh yeah, I'm doing it again. I have the skills to get out of it.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, tell me the ending of the story. I guess, now it's been, what, 10 years since the last stroke?
Yeah.
No stroke.
No stroke since then. So I've been very fortunate, and the last 10 years have been really great. And because of you encouraging me to look into it, I've joined Entrepreneurs Organization.
Yeah.
That's become a big and important part of my life. My business has grown. I work with some terrific people who do really great work, and we stay busy. And one of the things I remember working through with you was I had started visiting a friend of mine that had gone to prison.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about my plan to the parole board to have him come to work at my firm.
Yeah.
And, that was such a great thing to have you to listen to me and for us to talk about that, because ultimately him coming to my firm was just a great thing in my life. He became my best friend. He became my office manager. He worked for the firm for 7 years.
Oh my.
And as a result of that, we began representing inmates all over the state of Texas before the parole board. And so, starting with his experience and knowing what people needed and wanted in being represented, we've grown to where I have 3 full-time employees that work on nothing but parole and helping those people. And, I've, in getting to know our clients, it's really opened up for me that these people who go to prison, they have the same humanity and dignity as you and I.
And they have those conditioned selves too, don't they?
Yeah, yeah.
It seems like they're almost covered up in them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you and I talked, this is bringing up something for me, because I think you and I talked about taking my process to prisons. We'll have to investigate that more, because I'm very interested. But, I think what comes to mind the most with what you've said is that when you get those beliefs installed, I guess is the right word, and you really are, your behavior is matching them, then your purpose becomes more evident to you.
Yes.
And it seemed like this was just kind of evolving into at least one purpose of why you're here on this earth.
Right.
It must feel very gratifying to be able to touch people's lives like that.
Yeah, it's terrific. And what I find every time we work with somebody, or like having my friend come to work at the firm, it ends up being what I found to be a very selfish thing, because they will all thank me for what I give to them. But the reality is, I get so much more from them. And, it's really opened my mind, and working with you and coaching on the false self and identifying this doubting voice I have in my head. It's let me be more aware and more open to other people and who they are, and not make assumptions about what kind of person they are.
That's interesting that you say that, because I've found that a lot of people identify their conditioned voice as the critic. But it starts with, they're critical of themselves, but ends up being critical of other people. And so you kind of found the same thing, that once you get to your authentic self, that critical of other people really isn't even part of who you are. and you stop doing that naturally.
Yeah. And I feel like my life experience should have me not being critical or doubtful about others, because I've had so many great experiences with so many wonderful people. But that's still something that goes on in my head. But, I just try to be much more open about who I meet and know. That's one thing that I've seen through EO is you get to know people, and it is always the case that they are so different from and much more than I ever imagined when I first met them.
That first impression.
Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful, because what you're able to see is the authentic self in other people.
Yes.
Who sometimes can't. All of us trip over, I think, that conditioning at times and fall back into that self we don't want to be.
Right.
I love what you're emphasizing, which is the process I gave you doesn't make life perfect, doesn't make the outside world, in a way, not still throw curves at you at times. But you just have a different way of handling them than you did before.
Yes.
And so the work continues of self-development. It doesn't, I guess, never stops.
Right.
And so you're just using the process to keep coming back to that goal of the best self you have.
Right. And for me, there's always been something about communicating with somebody like you who is trained and has years of experience doing what you do. Having you listen to me, I find that through the process of talking, I come to see things that I could read 100 books and never have that same idea that I have working with somebody else like you.
And don't you find that with your EO, like-minded people, that you also get those insights?
Yes.
Because people that are open to grow and to see their mistakes as well as their gifts, it kind of makes them free to talk to, and to that talking, I think, does give us more insight.
Yeah, and it is the commitment to confidentiality in EO that allows everybody to be vulnerable and authentic. And so you get to know people on a more deeper level than you otherwise would. And it's been really terrific.
You talked a little bit how it impacted your personal life. Well, no, I think you mentioned that. You mentioned you were beginning to, see your wife and children. But I don't know. Tell me more about what changed in your relationship with your kids and your wife.
Well, I became more aware of who I wanted to be for them, for Robin as a spouse, and for Will and Amanda as their father. And it led me to be more intentional and have things that I would do that I might not otherwise have done. And, for me personally, I write a lot, and so writing to my wife and kids has been something that I enjoy doing, and they enjoy getting. And then at work, it's really helped me be more appreciative and accepting of others' contribution to our work. I think I was more, I need a bunch of me's, and I've realized it is so much better to have the group that we've got, and to have them all contribute their different talents in the way that they do is really great.
That's beautiful. You're just illustrating to me what a performance coach that I am knows, that if you help everyone be their best self in your company, it's going to be a different self than you are, but the performance is going to improve just by putting them in their natural energy of strengths.
Yeah.
I love
And we have, for the past few years, we start every morning at 8:30 sharp, standing around a conference table, and everybody has to share one win in the last 24 hours. So
nice.
it's kind of got a positive bent to it. And then we share one personal and professional goal that we each have for the day.
Nice.
And it takes, with 8 of us, it doesn't take much time at all to go around the room and share that, but it's such a great way for us to connect and keep in touch with what's going on outside of the office, and it's really helped us a lot.
That's a great culture, because you feel when you go to work, you feel like people know you and you feel connected to them and that you can turn to them if a problem comes up.
Yes.
I love that. Well, I think you've just described your best job ever. I didn't think of it at the time, but I believe that's what you just told us was your best job ever.
Yeah.
And I love what you've done, and I appreciate the acknowledgement and of what we did together. But mostly, I just appreciate that you've carried on without me, because my goal has always been to give people the tools and then exit, And so I love it. I appreciate your coming back to me and saying, yeah, this really helped.
Yeah, well, I can't thank you enough for all the tools that you gave me and the work you did listening to me. And it's with me every day.
I love it. Thank you.
Yeah.
And, I know you said something about vulnerability, of the confidentiality at your EO group. I appreciate your vulnerability today, because I think people out there wonder what my process is, and it's kind of like weird or a myth or something that they don't know. And so you've shed some light on what really happens, and that we're just humans and we're all trying to get better. And this is just one set of tools to help you get there. So thanks for coming and telling us about your life.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. I appreciate Ed sharing so vulnerably with all of you. And I want to tell you that after Ed's speech, he had a big request. I think there were several people, maybe 30 or 40 maybe, that requested a list of his empowering beliefs. Are you okay with releasing that to anyone that's interested?
Sure.
Great. Okay. Well, my email is drjayne@drjayne.com, and I will send him your request, and he will send you that list of life-changing statements that worked for him. Thank you very much. And if you haven't found your best life ever, start looking. It's out there somewhere. Dr. Jayne here.